Welcome to Stack Sessions. I'm Jeff Keyes, the field CTO at AllStacks, and I'll be your host. This podcast explores the intersection of software engineering and business strategy, what's actually working, what's hype, and how engineering leaders can navigate it all. Today, I'm really excited. I'm joined by Alok. He's the general partner at First Ventures. Alok brings a unique lens to our conversation. He's investing in the next generation of developer tools and infrastructure companies, which means he's constantly evaluating what technologies will actually transform how teams build software versus what's just noise. We're going to dig into how he sees the AI landscape reshaping engineering organizations, what signals he looks for when bringing back dev tool companies and the founders and engineering leaders, and what are they getting right and wrong about this moment. So let's get into it. Alok, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Jeff, for having me. Excited to be here and excited to dig into this topic.
Alok, just to kind of give some background, I've worked with various investment groups and board members before, not like you. You are a little more hands-on and have your fingers in it, which I love. I love your insight because you have something that spreads across, it's more than a quarterly outreach or sync. But tell me, why did you do this path that you're currently in?
Yeah. No, great question, Jeff. Again, thanks to you for having me. I'm a first generation immigrant, came from India, went to grad school here, started my career in a small company up in Seattle called Microsoft. And I come from the operating side, and I always felt, having been part of Microsoft for a bunch of time and then spent about a decade in Silicon Valley in a couple of startups, that there's an opportunity for operating execs to come into startups and actually help them not just from capital, but also from a product strategy, even go to market in certain aspects. And so to your point about hands-on opportunity, that's what excites me, is not just kind of deploying capital, is actually working side by side with the founders and amazing companies like AllStacks, right? So that in a nutshell, what motivates me is doing this not just with one company at a time, but doing it with like 3-4 companies at a time and seeing the interconnections and seeing what's around the corner where we could apply some of the learnings from one category or one vertical into other verticals. And there we can dig into those opportunities. But that's what sort of motivated me, was to apply some of that operating experience and then connect the dots across industries and verticals.
Well, let me dive into probably the most interesting question. As you look across software companies now that are trying to generate more value for their customers and create a value in the business, what do you really wish you could tell engineering leaders and product leaders and tell them, please, I do this every dang day. I'm looking at companies. I'm seeing what's going on. Please watch these trends. Do the following. What's your top level advice as you see companies struggling, especially in everything that's going on in the world?
Yeah, I think AI is real. Jevons paradox is also real. And let me unpack that. I think there is a lot of noise in the market about what AI tools, specifically for engineers or software development folks, can do. But I think I'm pretty hands-on. I play with these tools. I think a lot of times it works. Yes, there is a jagged frontier, and there are aspects of it where you have to keep your eyes on it and sort of like human in the loop. But there are things which it can do, which even a year ago was unimaginable. So my sort of advice to all the product and engineering leaders and startup founders to a certain extent is, get your hands dirty, use these tools. Yes, they have flaws, but they can dramatically alter the trajectory of your companies if you really come in with a clean slate and an open mind while you're trying these tools. Right. So that's sort of one piece. And then Jevons paradox, the other aspect of this is that there is some fear in certain circles that, oh, this is going to take jobs away and so on and so forth. I actually don't agree with that. I believe more software is going to be written, and there will be more software engineers in the world 10 years from now than they are today, maybe 2 to 3 times more. And they will create more value for their organizations than they do today. So that to me, and this is like classic Jevons paradox applied to this industry. So I'll pause here. So focus on getting AI native across the board, across all functions, and then read up on Jevons paradox. Don't fear this, adopt it, because this is going to dramatically alter industries in the next decade.
But dive into the paradox just a bit. Like, for those that aren't familiar, give us the gist.
Jevons was a economist, a British economist, and he coined this term when steam engines first came out, where essentially people were saying that because of this automation, the usage of coal will reduce because engines are more efficient,
Mhm.
and so they will require less of the fuel, right? Well, what happened was the complete opposite. Actually, coal consumption and fuel consumption increased because now people could travel further, they could do more, and more business value was created, right? So this is like a almost 150-year-old paradox. It has been applied over and over again in industries, and now software engineering is a white collar discipline. And I think we feel, and I've also written code. I'm a trained software engineer. We feel that some of these waves will not impact us. Guess what? It is. But this time around, it's being applied to knowledge work. And software engineering is knowledge work, right? So Jevons paradox is being applied to knowledge work, where things are becoming more efficient, whether it is around code generation aspect of it. But because of that, there wouldn't be less software engineers or less requirement to write code. In fact, there'll be more software being written and more engineers being needed.
Yeah.
Yes, there may be some interim in next 1 or 2 years where organizations will try to reorient themselves to this new world. But once they're past that, in a longer horizon, let's say 5 to 10 year horizon, I truly believe this paradox applies to our industry.
I love it. Well, and with the focus on get your hands dirty with AI, how, when you look at companies, are you knowing that they're getting their hands dirty? And how are you knowing that they're not? I know we talked about a piece where measuring AI adoption is another interesting aspect, but
Yes.
somebody's like, oh, yeah, we're doing AI. And you're like, really? Tell me a little bit more about how you think about that.
Yeah. I think one of the tell, and again, this is from my vantage point working with early stage startups. So I would say where the team sizes are 10 to 100 people
Yeah.
organizations. So that's my vantage point. I'm not talking about large organizations of thousands of people, right? I think one interesting tell is the combination of, and again, maybe it's a bias I have, but I do feel that sometimes people who have more experience are a little bit more careful in adopting AI, and that's fine. They've
Mhm.
seen these waves of tools come, and so they're more cautious, right? Versus if you look at somebody who's in their 20s, who's diving headfirst into
Right.
this, right? So, one tell for me is, do you have at least one such person in your organization who is sort of quote unquote AI native, who has grown up with cursors of the world, and it's like they don't know anything before this, right? Do you have somebody like that in it all? That's number one. Number two, does the CEO think whenever there's a new problem or a new initiative or a new sort of expansion opportunity, do they think people first, meaning, oh, let's go hire X number of more people? Or do they think, oh, can we try applying AI to this problem and see how far we can take it to? Right. So those are the two. One is sort of the mix of young blood in the organization. And I'm not saying don't value experience. Absolutely. But I'm saying having a mix of one or two of these catalysts in the organization, which will challenge your assumptions,
Mhm.
right, is important. That's a early, like a leading indicator to me. And the second is, are the CEOs and the leaders still thinking about what we used to call in Microsoft empire building,
Yeah.
meaning bringing more and more people into the org to
Mm.
solve larger and larger problems? Or are you thinking more, let's try an AI tool and see how far this can take us.
Yeah.
So those are the two sort of leading indicators in my mind.
Any other common advice that you have for, your head of engineering or your CTOs that you're giving or wish you could more forcefully give?
I think change is hard. Culture change is very hard. So don't underestimate change management in all of this. Don't just assume everyone will be on board on day one. Everyone brings their own experiences and biases and challenges. So what I would say is that no matter how big your org is, maybe it's 30-person org, or maybe it's 100-person, or maybe it's 500-person, right? I think you have to be very intentional about change management and how you roll out some of these tools. And you have to also listen and hear. The saying is, you're the man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So don't try to apply AI to every problem. There are some things where you still need that human judgment, human in the loop, especially in the software development lifecycle. So I would say be intentional about it, about rolling it out. Listen to your people, listen and do proper change management, right? Which is like a crawl, walk, run approach. Try
Yep.
it with a pod, try it with two pods, compare the results, do some A/B testing, then roll it out, right? So be intentional in how you roll this out in your organization. That would be my one sort of wish.
Let's pivot a bit. You talked about the team a bit and how the team is evolving. Back in the day of early starts of Amazon, I still remember reading the famous article about the two pizza team, and that was the goal. And big companies were like, we can't ever do that. What are you seeing AI doing to this, and what are you coaching people of all sizes of how they make the team work?
I also distinctly remember when that memo was out, right? I was in Azure and Microsoft at the time, and we had to scramble and reorient the team structure. I do think the Two Pizza team is evolving. I think it'll be smaller, more nimbler teams. There's this notion of pods. I think the pods will have quote unquote AI teammates. And I do believe that every individual contributor in a software engineering team, whether it is a developer or QA person, a product manager, or SRE, DevOps, all of them will now become orchestrator and manager of AI agents.
Yep.
Right. And so I think the Two Pizza team may become smaller. That's my gut feeling. But then it will be augmented by way more number of agents. And these would be all types of agents, from what Allstacks has, deep research agents or requirements analysis agents, to QA agents or security agents. So there's a combination of all these sort of agents which will be augmenting small pods, if you will.
Yeah, there was recently a note from even LinkedIn about the product builder path and the more tightly bundling of product management or product builder with a developer as well, and even shrinking that down. AWS recently announced the AI SDLC of let's do mob engineering instead of a traditional, even
Yeah.
though that's Sprint, let's do that.
Stack Sessions is brought to you by Allstacks. Something happened in your codebase today that's going to blow up your delivery timeline, and you don't know it yet. The Allstacks Intelligence Engine connects your project and code data to surface delivery and technical risks before they become a crisis. Begin with answers, end with dashboards. Sign up for early access free through January 2026 at allstacks.com.
How is your advising teams on the structure and the style and so forth? Do you have a thesis about what you see your companies doing that are working and what's not working? What are some of the things you're seeing that's happened that are being described to you?
Yeah. See, there is this notion of IDEO, the design firm, defined this where I first read it, which is about T-shaped people, where you need to have breadth, but you need to have depth in one or few areas, sort of like a T, right? There's another term for it called expert generalists. So I'll give an example in SDLC space. There was this notion of about front-end developers and back-end developers and DBAs or database administrators. And I think that specialization could go away, right? So there will be potentially full stack engineers augmented by front end agents and back end agents or database management agents and so on, right? So what that implies is that an engineer has to, again, you don't need to be an expert in all of that. I'm seeing this all the time. People are writing code in languages which they don't know, where they think that they don't know that language,
Right.
right? And then they use code review tools and security tools, and so then they get how much technical debt they're accumulating. Time will tell, right? It's still early days for that. But I think this notion that, oh, I'm a front end developer, I can't write back end code, or I'm a back end developer, I don't know anything about CSS. I think that may potentially collapse. And there will be a notion of people who are more generalists across the entire stack. So sort of having more breadth and then still have a depth in a certain area. So you could still be a back-end engineer for majority of the time, but there is an expectation that you are sort of this full stack in some sense. So that's one pattern I'm seeing, where these more T-shaped people in the org, more expert generalists. You talked about product managers. I know there are a lot of people who are product managers who are listening to this, right? I think product managers, and I've been a product manager myself, both in big companies like Microsoft as well as in startups. And I think that function is also evolving in interesting ways. I don't know where it will land, but things like I write a PRD, and then I work with a designer who creates a Figma mockup, and then I work with the engineer who with a front end engineer who works builds it, and then we generate an API and give it. That's going away. What I think some AI forward product managers are doing is they're literally using Lovable and Replit and just they're generating mockups.
Yep.
They're writing their specs in English, right? But then they're using that spec as a prompt with the guardrails of an organization. We'll talk about that. And then they're literally generating a clickable prototype, which is not a Figma mockup. It's actually running code. Now, there's nothing in the back of it, but it's actually something you can touch and feel and say, oh, this is what I meant when I said that the user experience should look like. And then they hand it off to either the full stack engineer or the pod, which could be a full stack engineer and a designer, which can take it, we can polish it up, make it secure, make it performant, make it production ready, and take it. So I think the role of the product manager is evolving. I would encourage product managers, even if they don't have a software engineering background, to play with some of these tools like Lovable, like Replit, and see how far you go and have some passion, like some weekend hack, some project you do, which could be outside your sort of day job, and play with it. That would be my recommendation here. And I'm seeing that, right? There's a lot of PMs who are generating these prototypes.
I love it. Well, and in fact, as you deal with a lot of founders also that are typically playing the role of product people, this constant set of iteration and generating new models is great. What's this doing to the generation of value? Like, how are you seeing companies that are doing this well? How are you seeing the results?
Yeah, that is a hard problem. And I'm going to make a shameless pitch for all stacks here. But I think there is the pushback that I've heard over and over again is, oh, we don't know how secure this code is. Oh, I don't know what tech debt it's accumulating. All of that, yes, I hear that, and I think those are problems. I don't think, and there are tools for that, right? There are, security guardrails, and that, I've invested in a couple of companies in that space. There are code review tools where the human in the loop, which is making sure that the code that is being checked into and goes into production, there's a human being who's signing off on it. That there is definitely an element of tech debt accumulation and an element of how secure this code is. But to your question, is it actually creating more business value? Is a hard problem. And that is where I think you need engineering and product leaders do need tools like AllStacks to measure it. And measuring is an art and a science of what you measure, right? I remember from my early days in Microsoft about how many lines of code were written and so on. I think that those kinds of low-level metrics, those do get gamed. Developers are smart. They get gamed all the time. And in the AI code generation world, they will get gamed even more. I think there is a nuance in what you measure, and measuring business value based on actual outcomes delivered to the customer is something I encourage the audience to look at. And there are tools for that. Try it, play with it, what works in your organization. But don't leave measuring as a vibe, right? Don't just have a gut feeling and saying, oh, I'm generating more code. My engineers seem all busy, Clearly, we are doing better. Well, yes and no, right? Is it actually generating more business value? Product managers think about this all the time. Oh, I delivered this feature. Sure. But did the feature get adopted? How many people are using it, right? Are they paying for it? Like on and on and on. There's a whole element of adoption metrics and usage metrics and other metrics of business value that you should take into account. Don't just look at raw code metrics or raw bugs or vulnerabilities or things like that, right? Those are still important, but I think there's a higher order business metrics that you can now measure because because AI now allows you to pull more data in and analyze the data in an instant. You can pull all the data, like all the engineering observability data and find patterns and correlate, saying, oh, this pod here seems to struggle with this kind of work, or this pod here generates a lot of features, but they also generate a lot of security issues. And to your point about this measuring, not just at an individual level, but also maybe at a pod level, whatever that pod means for your organization. Maybe pod means not just humans, maybe the pod means human plus agents. Maybe measure that, right? That's a hard problem. That's why I caveated all of this, that it's an art and a science, and you are dealing with humans, which means whatever metric you put in place can potentially get gamed. And so that is where I think it is just like in security. I give the analogy that security in general is like a cat and mouse game, where every time there's new attack surfaces coming and new vulnerabilities come and new tools come and the cycle repeats. I think the same is true even for measuring some of the aspects. Whether so, yes, storing and collecting telemetry and observability is becoming cheaper. Analyzing it is faster. But what you analyze and whether that metric actually moves the needle for the business is still a cat and mouse game, because you're dealing with humans on the other side.
I do like what you talked about to intermix two pieces, and I'll have you react to this, though. You talked about the expert generalists, and your comment was, hey, product people, learn how to be more developers. But what I also hear you saying on the flip side is, hey, developers, testers, QA, learn how to speak the language of the business better.
Yes.
Understood, like you can go game this, but as we go forward to produce more value, learn how to speak the language of this is producing value. Please, and I'm assuming you would say, don't have anybody tell you how many story points they produced or how many features they delivered. Comment on that about what you wish everyone was doing in these new pod structures as they speak to you about the business value they're creating.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jeff. I think you're right that when I say expert generalists or T-shaped people, I would love if technical folks in an org learned some of the language of business. And what that means is actually understanding what your company's products are and services are. What are the types of customers? What is being delivered? How are they deriving value from it? Even in the pre-AI era, people were trying to do this by saying things like, oh, I put every engineer, when we onboarded them, we make them be a support engineer for a week where they can actually interact with customers. I think that still applies in this AI world, right? Every time you onboard a new R&D person, maybe they should do a rotation in support or a customer success org where they actually interact with the customer and understand the customer's pain point and their environment and their challenges and their industry, and then apply it back. I think some of those principles still apply. And in fact, in this world, it gets amplified. AI is just a tool at the end of the day, in my humble opinion. It just amplifies whatever you're doing. And if your org is not up leveling with this understanding the business outcomes, and it's just going to amplify the slop that your org is going to generate, right? It's just going to generate 10 times more slop. So even if you're a software engineer listening to this, or a technical leader, some of the tried and tested practices of having your engineers do a rotation, on-call rotation or support rotation, I think that's a simple way to have them imbibe and have empathy for the customer.
Yep. Yeah, the comment was made, if you can create AI code slop, you can also create AI product spec slop. You can also create AI, design slop. Don't think that whatever your job was isn't replaceable, because while it might be slop today, it's getting better. And the better the context you feed it, the more customer sessions you get it. Here we go. So you better use it to amplify now. Don't get left behind. Great discussions. Let me pivot here. You had talked about day 0 versus day 2. What is this day 0 versus day 2 thing? Why is it important?
So day 0 is like everything shift left. So everything that is not production. So the day 0 tools are tools which you use to build the software. And day tools are the tools that once it's been production, you need to make it operate well, right? Whether it's observability, maintainability, cost control, security, and so on. So while a lot of people can clearly see that AI code generation it's amplifying the so-called productivity of shift left, right? Where you're generating 10 or 100 times more code. But what I encourage the product and the engineering leaders to think about is, are you now shifting the bottleneck to day 2 tools? Can you monitor all this code? is your code actually burning more cloud tokens? Is it less secure, right? How maintainable is this 10 times more code? Because there's a famous saying that has been attributed to IBM. I don't know if it's true or not, but it said that the computer can never be held accountable. So that's what
Exactly.
day two tools are, right? Like, and
Yeah.
this applies to day zero as well. Let's say, an engineer wrote code and something goes wrong in production. And it traces it back to saying, okay, this engineer or engineering leader signed off or code reviewed this code. That engineer leader cannot throw their hands off and say, oh, that was code generated by Claude. Because at the end of the day, the engineer that signed off on that code is accountable. So you are still accountable for the code that was put into production, whether it was AI generated or not. I think that's where the role of software engineer might also evolve, where they may have more breadth of work, where engineers may be asked to do more code reviews or more security work or more architecture work, as opposed to more code generation work.
Right.
And so they may have to do some of this day two work as well, where you need to make sure that if something goes down in production, you have done the right hooks for observability and tied back into the code, whether it was written by AI or not, right? That's where, again, I feel more engineering observability tools are needed end to end, which can highlight these bottlenecks that are happening in delivering value. So yes, your engineering team is writing more code, but is your actual application in production less stable? Are you having more, outages, right? How quickly are you able to recover from the outages? Is the outages longer? What is the mean time to recovery of these outages? Has that become complex? Because now there is a cognition gap. The code is not understood by the engineer who signed off on the code, right? Because it was AI generated. So that's what I mean by day zero versus day two tools. If you have all stacks or tools like that, that can show you, right? Hey, these are the bottlenecks now. The bottlenecks have shifted here. We need to maybe invest more in this area, maybe into more day two tools, or maybe into more code review tools, or maybe into more, and that I would say is different for every organization, right? Depending on the kind of, whether you're producing more internal apps versus customer facing apps versus, does your app sit in a hardware that is shipped to a customer where updating that software is much harder? So the bar becomes much, much higher, and people have to be more accountable because that change management of the product is much harder. So on and on and on, right?
Yeah. Yes, and these new AI workflows and models add a new dimension to that whole path, because whereas code largely was deterministic before, now these AI workflows are non-deterministic. What? You mean I
Exactly.
could type in something one day that'll produce one result, and then a different day will yes. Oh my gosh, how do we support that? What does that look like? What will be observability in that day? How do we manage that? And even more, I can't tell you, every single day that I talk to customers, I hear the same thing. Can you help me see the thinking behind the LLM and how it came up with the answers that this project was at risk and this one's not, or these requirements suck? And I mean, it is a journey, and that day two infrastructure is really important. Following along those lines, back to the team and the team structure around the day two, how is this changing some of the junior engineer versus as they're understanding things versus what they're building? How are you seeing that, and what are you advising teams to do about it?
Yeah, I think junior engineers are, in all honesty, they are in a tricky spot, right? Because on one hand, these tools are amazing and they're generating gobs and gobs of code. But you cannot skip the basics, because at the end of the day, the code that was generated, you have to still sign off on it. You're still accountable for it. I do worry sometimes about these engineers entering the workforce now, where are they skipping the basics?
Yeah.
Because these tools are generating so much more code, are they actually not even understanding the code that they just signed off on, right? So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is more around mid to senior level people, whose identity was somewhat associated with the quality of code that they written because it was handcrafted. And for them, it's a bit of a struggle, because now they feel that AI is taking away that handcrafted nature of the work that they were so good at, right? And now they're being asked to do things like reviewing somebody else's code, or worrying about security, or worrying about production uptime and things like that, where their role is becoming more breadth rather than handcrafting code.
Mhm.
And so that's a different kind of challenge. That's why when I alluded to initially about change management in your org, and I don't know, every org is different, right? What is the mix of this junior versus mid-level versus senior people in your org? And
Right.
how you roll out this varies basis of that, and how you roll out to a mid-level person versus a senior person versus a junior person also varies. And so this whole identity of a software engineer with this new tooling in place, I think is evolving. And there's a psychological element to it as well, right? Like where people have to probably be coached and people have to be maybe explained how their scope is expanding or how their role is expanding and not contracting. And that's what I mean by this tools versus identity thing. There's another aspect. I've heard people where in organizations where they have capped the number of tokens that an engineer uses. And there are these metrics. Yeah, you're laughing, but it's
I've heard
true.
that too. I
It's
know.
true. Yeah,
We're just having the same
because
conversation. Yeah.
again, it could be like a cost conscious organization, right? Where they charge billable hours to their customer,
Yeah.
things like that, as opposed to producing a product. You know what I'm saying? More like SIs and things like that. But a metric I heard is what percentage of an engineer's comp do you spend on inference tokens? Is it 5%, 10%, 20%? So let's say I'll make it like even more simple. Let's say you pay somebody 100 grand a year.
Yep.
Are you willing to spend 10 grand or 20 grand on that person on token cost? What is that number? Are you even tracking it?
Right.
Are you even tracking it?
Right.
Do you have a budget? Does it vary by junior person versus senior person? On and on and on. There are so many things. And again, it varies by organization to organization and what value you are delivering to your clients. Sometimes maybe it does make sense to cap it at a certain percentage because you're charging by the hour. So things like that, right? There's a lot of, I would say, uncertainty, but at the same time, that is also the opportunity to bring data, bring this telemetry, bring these insights into the organization so they transform themselves into more AI native orgs.
I love it. I have 20 more questions to ask you, but we are out of time. Alok, if people have an idea or you've got founders or aspiring founders that are looking for things or companies that want to get in touch with you, tell us a little bit about Firstray Ventures and how to get in touch with you.
First of all, Jeff, thanks for having me. Firstrays is a seed fund. We are based in Silicon Valley. The way I describe it is we invest in companies that sell to technical audiences. It could be CIO, CTO, or CISO. And the products and services you deliver could be infrastructure, data infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, developer tools, security tools, some vertical SaaS applications. But that's sort of the core focus. And I'm available on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn will be available in the show notes. Feel free to ping me. I always respond, and I'm happy to help. You can look at my LinkedIn profile for reviews of how I work with founders and the kind of companies I work with today or have in the past. So feel free to reach out on LinkedIn if you have any idea you want to bounce off of VC in this space.
I love it. And wherever you are in an organization, whoever you are, if you don't understand what AI is doing to the world of software creation, Alok is your new business customer. And you should learn how to talk to Alok. I don't care if you're in a big, huge company or a small one. Go create yourself pods and learn to speak the language of the business and understand the concepts that we're talking about here. I'm excited. I have so much other stuff that we'll talk about, I'm sure, next time. But thank you very much. This has been just a great time. Thanks for listening. And until next time, thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.